I guess I have to say good day to everyone. Um, I'm glad to see folks from around my learning network here. Um, I'm Mark Wilson. I got to make up my title as technologian at the Western Institute for Social Research, which is located in Berkeley, California. I'm in Whittier, California, in Southern California, and want to respectfully acknowledge the original caretakers of this land, the Tongva peoples, and all their ancestors. I also recognize this land, now known as Los Angeles County, is home to many indigenous peoples. ChatGPT is the shiny new thing, but my take on it is it lacks the whole discussion that's going on. And I don't know about your email, but my email is full of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT and all these things, and especially the educational trends that I follow is full of it. But what I believe it lacks context, and that's why I wanted to do this seminar. So what I want to do is just a quick, I hope, whirlwind tour of the entire field, and then leave most of our time together for a discussion. And so that we can talk about the effects that artificial intelligence in general, and of course, ChatGPT and these other, I mean, that's the new word. And I love that you called it ChatCBT because that's coming too. But these things are proliferating. It's unbelievable. So if you've played with any of this, you'll know that there are 3 or 4 new companies, platforms, whatever you want to call them, every day. And so ChatGPT has already become kind of an obsolete term. But anyway, I want to start, and that's why I listed on the announcement, the flyer, the 4 terms that I want to focus on today: complexity, technology, research, and learning. And so I'm going to start with complexity and then move through these terms. And again, I want to go quickly. I have a lot of slides, but I don't want to get hung up on any particular point. Of course, questions are always welcome. But again, my intention is to just go through the material and then have most of our time for a discussion. We'll see how that goes. And there's a technical, no, okay. So the image before the brain. So all of the advertising, or whatever we want to call it, that we see tries to give agency to this technology. And so we see all these images of people and brains and schematics that look like brains, but actually all of this technology looks more like the internet. This is just a little piece of the internet. And that's what's going on all around the world. So there's a history of this, of course. It seems like it arrived, this spring. It seems like, oh, there's this new thing that arrived in the spring. But actually, the term artificial technology was created in 1956, so it's almost as old as I am. And you can go to Wikipedia, and here's this nice little graphic. But the important thing is that this entire ecosphere of artificial intelligence is a complex system. And this is what no one is mentioning. Everybody's like, oh, look, I have this new thing, and it does this. And that's fine. That's how, capitalism works. Most of these tools are corporate. There are some open source tools. But taken together, they're all a complex adaptive system because they have these properties. And these are just the basic properties of complexity, that it's open, it's emergent. And so again, these technologies have come and gone over the decades, but they're emerging again. They seem spontaneous. Of course, they're created by people, but they're nonlinear, dynamic. They self-organize to a sense, And of course, they're adaptive. They're changing every day. A corollary, or another branch of complexity theory, complexity science, whatever you want to call it, is chaos theory. And I want to contrast the two. Complexity is a system or a group or an organization or just how you perceive the world as being more than the sum of its parts. So things that are complex, you can take little pieces, but you can never understand how the whole system works together because it's too complex. Where chaos theory is sort of the inverse of that, where you can take a few simple rules and you can get spontaneous order emerging from those rules that you couldn't predict, and yet appears to be, in some senses, alive. Most people don't remember that there was a whole movement in the 70s and the 80s to create artificial life. They were fascinated with how cells replicate and emerge into larger life forms, and flocks of birds, murmuration, and these things. And so there was a lot of money and a lot of time spent on what they called artificial life, and then it just went away. The same thing with artificial intelligence. There's actually been a couple of periods that they call the artificial winters, where the funding dried up in the 70s and then again in the late 80s. And then there was a little period in the late 90s. And then now it's on. All the funding is coming to artificial intelligence. So one of the nodes, to use the term, of all of this research is the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico. I made this image using artificial intelligence, a program called Midjourney, because this is a much better representation than this humanizing, giving these robots, images of robots to train us, is what's happening, to train us on artificial intelligence. The Santa Fe Institute uses complexity theory to look at things like the stock market in particular, but also organizations. They work with many organizations, and how new ideas and new systems emerge, is the word, out of existing organizations and contexts. In doing my research, I discovered a neuroscientist, psychiatrist, and philosopher named Iain McGilchrist. And he talks about how the brain works and points out that everything that we learned in the 80s, 70s, and 80s about the bicameral mind and the left and right hemispheres and, all the stuff that became part of pop culture, academic culture, more than pop culture, turned out not to be correct with 40 or 50 years more research. And Iain McGilchrist has led the way in the medical research, I guess you would say, as a neuroscientist. But he's also a philosopher and a psychiatrist, so he has the practical application of working with psychiatric patients. He's worked with people with many kinds of brain damage to see how the hemispheres adapt and what they specialize in. And just the one takeaway from his work that applies here is there seems to be two ways of looking at the world. And the more I read of him, the more I look around and say, yeah, that's kind of what's going on. There's the extremely focused, very ideological, always correct, never wrong, what he calls the left hemisphere. And then there's the more holistic, it depends, it's complicated, let's look at the bigger picture, philosophical part of the brain, which he basically maps to the right hemisphere. But of course, it's not that simple, is also one of his messages. But there are kind of two ways of looking at the world. Recently, I've been doing some work on mapping, and I stumbled on this map by Spillhouse, and this is a map of the world. And so this is just to illustrate that how we apply our attention to something really shapes.
Bye, puppy.
Ava, can you mute yourself, please?
Sorry,
No worries. Thanks.
with my puppy.
And so this is of course, for us, this is kind of a hard map to understand, but I'll point out that being a California chauvinist, I put California in the top part of the map. And if you look carefully, you can see Baja California and Central America. But this is just a different way of looking at the world. And as I move into the technology part, I also discovered a linguist and anthropologist named Daniel Everett. And he claims that the original technology is language. Now, as a retired glassblower, I would argue with him that the original technology is fire, but we could have that debate. But he's interested in language and how it shapes how we view the world, because as soon as you have language, you're already one step removed from the world. You're interacting with the world, you're through media, you're mediated. And from that follows everything else, certainly in Western culture. Of course, I'm from the Western culture, and so I suppose if you were from the Eastern culture, you could have a completely different take on this. But from the Western point of view, and I love this quote, "In the beginning was the word." No, it wasn't. That's from Dan Everett. Just pointing out that people and animals, particularly, do fine in the world without language, and even have some consciousness, some unconsciousness, and different ways of operating in, quote, the real world, unquote. Now, Marvin Minsky, who started, I believe, and ran the artificial intelligence lab at MIT, has this great quote here, or concept. He calls some of these words suitcase words. And I'm going to put consciousness in here with memory, thinking, intelligence. These are words that mean many things to many people in many contexts, and the context usually determines what you're talking about. But just to point out that even as I'm using these words, I'm using them differently than commonly, in the media these days, and perhaps how you think of these words. And so we just want to be aware that these words have different meanings. Here's another AI-generated image that I particularly like. But another great quote: "Technology is anything that wasn't around when you were born." And I love this quote, because to children today, it's just natural to have this computing device that's always on, it's always in your hand, and it goes everywhere you go. That's just normal. That's not technology. That's just completely normal. So this is another great quote from Doug Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, is how we move through our relations with technology. And even those of us of a certain age, if we've been engaging with technology over the last couple of decades, we're used to it. But we certainly know people that consider it alien, want nothing to do with it, and move through their lives quite well without using any of this technology. Another fellow at the Santa Fe Institute who just recently passed was Cormac McCarthy. And his interest in complexity is the unconscious. And again, pointing out that while we do, and especially academics, of course, intermediate the world with language and words, that's not our entire approach, and that the unconscious plays a large part. In this little story here, he points out about the chemist who was trying to figure out the benzene molecule, and in a dream saw that it was a circle, an Ouroboros. And certainly he was not a mythologist, he was a chemist, and yet this is how he solved that riddle. So this is just to give context to this idea of artificial intelligence. Both words are loaded, have multiple meanings, and in a way are being used now by corporations to create markets and to increase their market share. And we just really need to be aware of that. This is not to say that these tools aren't useful. They are, and they will be. But I just wanted to give it some context. So this term artificial intelligence was created by another man named McCarthy in 1956. And they had a little seminar, and it turned out that they spread around North America, MIT, Stanford, different places, and started working on this idea of artificial intelligence. Their original concept was to use computers to recreate human brains. And it's been, 70 years now almost. And it's not, to me, it doesn't look possible, but you never know. Here's a automata, a mechanical boy, I guess, or man, from an early attempt to recreate human life using just machine technology. So you might have heard that a couple of the AI researchers at Google suggested that they slow down on this technology of artificial intelligence, that it might have some negative consequences that we're not aware of because it is complex, it is adaptive, it's always changing. And they got fired for that. So you might have heard about that. The way they characterize artificial intelligence is a stochastic parrot. And stochastic, I guess, is a chemistry word. I'm not familiar with the word, but it just means random, basically, and assembling things randomly. And that is what ChatGPT does. It doesn't think, it has no agency. It just uses statistical models to predict the next word in what it understands to be a sentence. And so I love this image of the stochastic parrot because it removes the agency and the mystery and all of that. It's just a modeling device for text. And now it is moving into sound. So speech would follow. But again, no agency, no intelligence, just prediction. And so I put this in so we can pause and just say, okay, so there's some context. But beyond words and language, and of course, machines and computing, there is a natural world. And we don't want to forget that all of this is to describe and to maneuver throughout this world. So again, here's another image that I particularly like. I love this designer. You see her work all across technology reporting, showing the human brain as a machine. And this was the original intent was to make a computer, a machine, mimic thinking. And it's just not going to happen. So this is a very short clip that I particularly enjoy.
One of my favorite machines, one of the most magnificent automata of the 18th century. It's this boy, this writer. He was built in Switzerland by Pierre Jaquet-Droz, one of Switzerland's greatest clockmakers. And the aim was, I think, to mechanize reason and automate the passions. Jaquet-Droz was about 50 years old. in the early 1770s when he designed and built this masterpiece. Inside the boy are almost 6,000 parts. What's astonishing is that every one of these crafted components has been refined and miniaturized to fit completely inside the body of the boy himself. What Jacques-Hédroz did was to use the technologies of homeostasis, of miniaturization, to build really a true automaton. At his core is a great stack of cams. As these cams move, 3 cam followers read their shaped edges and translate these into the movement of the boy's arm. Working together, the cams control every stroke of the quill pen and exactly how much pressure is applied to the paper, so as to achieve beautiful, elegant, and fluid writing. With this sublime machine, Jacques-Hédroz had reverse engineered the very act of writing. But the mechanical boy contained one perhaps even more astonishing feature. The wheel that controlled the cams was made up of letters that could be removed and then replaced and reordered. These allowed the writer, in principle, to make any word and any sentence. In other words, it allowed the writer to be programmed. This beautiful boy is thus a distant ancestor of the modern programmable computer.
So that slowed us all down. 3 minutes seems like a long time in a modern digital age. But I love that. And I'll point out that that was around the time the United States was organizing, self-organizing, emerging as a country, and long before typewriters were, quote, invented, unquote. And yet there was a machine that used a quill pen to write. But even in his description, he used words like passion, which, again, this is a theme that's run throughout our history with machines and technology, that we want to give it agency. So here's what really drew me into studying AI was this quote from Kate Crawford: AI is neither artificial nor intelligent. And I think that's a simple statement of fact. And she's a computer scientist that teaches and works with Microsoft. Her Atlas of AI is one of the best sellers and one of the go-to books for artificial intelligence. And I believe this image was drawn by a human using digital technology, but soon it'll be hard to tell. So artificial intelligence, this is the word everybody's throwing around. So here's some definitions, and I listed them in the description of this seminar. And they're being used interchangeably, but of course they're not interchangeable. But machine learning is, I think, the proper term rather than artificial intelligence. But the goal is artificial generative intelligence. That would be the thinking machine, which again, 70 years in, doesn't look like it's right around the corner. People keep predicting it, especially our tech friends, Musk, Gates, different Altman, keep predicting it, but I don't see us being any closer than we were. And then there's these different, they call them neural networks. Again, it's just a computer. It's more in thinking of graph theory. Nodes and connections would be, a better, to me, term than neural connections. But this is how people have been thinking about it. And I love the nested dolls from Star Wars. I couldn't resist that one. So here's a definition of stochastic. And one of the concerns going forward is toxic generativity, which is this idea that now that we have artificial intelligence and it's producing texts and images particularly, but also music and different things, that these will then be searchable by artificial intelligence and will push human content to the edge and recognize, and in this sense, there'll be so much more of it because machines are doing it much faster and in higher volumes, that there'll just be this degeneration of information and knowledge. So this is another concern going forward. And we've all heard of hallucinations. It only takes a slight tweak of the algorithm to just return gibberish. And going back to Dr. McGilchrist's idea of how the left brain is certain, it's focused, it's certain, and it doesn't change its mind. It's very easy, if anybody's played with ChatGPT, to get some very wrong information with some very fake references that sounds completely plausible. And so this is a concern going forward. So just to focus a bit on the technology, I'll go quickly. WISER is a social research institute, and we don't have computer scientists, but we have computer scientists here today. So I'll certainly apologize for being this basic, but to people who don't program, don't use computers, I just want to remind them that this is the bottom under binary. This is what a computer does. It has a bunch of switches and they're on or off, ones or zeros. And everything that we see, all this amazing technology that we interact with, it's all based on ones and zeros, little switches on and off. But they're very small and they go very fast. And you can make them communicate around the world and show people talking and generate all kinds of amazing texts and images and documents. Anybody that's written a computer program or taken a programming class, the first thing you wrote was "Hello World," because apparently that was the first thing that was ever broadcast across between computers, between computer scientists. But the simple greeting, "Hello World," in binary code, that's what it looks like. So this is back to the old green screens. I wrote my first computer program on punch cards. They wouldn't let us anywhere near the computer. We just got to write the code, and then the technician created the punch cards, and then they created a paper tape, and then they fed that to the computer. So, the technology's come a long way, but again, it's just ones and zeros. So here's a great little illustration that includes that stochastic parrot. So when you go to ChatGPT and you ask a question, it works kind of like a search engine, because search engines are kind of machine learning also. And it searches what's available. And then it makes it into what it looks like human language, and then provides you that answer. So again, just to simplify it, when you ask ChatGPT any question, what is artificial intelligence? This is what it'll do. Now, another concern amongst, well, a lot of people, scientists, sociologists, policymakers, just across the spectrum of organizations, is the data set. We don't know what these machine learning platforms or artificial intelligences, whatever you want to call them, we don't know how they're trained because they're proprietary. Now, there are a few open source technologies that are coming along, but the data sets are so large that even if you have access to them, there's no way to really understand them except through machine learning. So this is an illustration of one data point about, let's say, me. If I was to ask an artificial intelligence, or ChatGPT to use that term, about me, this is what it would do. It would go out onto the internet and it would look for relationships, public data, police records, financial statements, real estate records, all these different things. And this points to the problem of there's no true anonymity, because using artificial intelligence, you only need 1 or 2 data points about an anonymous person to identify them. Location being one of the ones that our phones broadcast constantly. And if you know where a phone broadcasts from in the middle of the night, you can pretty much identify who owns that phone. So again, to dig a little deeper, IBM had this great website, and it shows you what happens when you ask a question. This is the IBM's question: should we go surfing? And so you ask ChatGPT, should I go surfing? And so it applies algorithms, which are these mathematical formulas, and they have weights. And so here you can see the numeric values. There's the input values on the left, yes or no, back to binary thinking. And then at the bottom are the weights, 1 through 5. And depending on the question, how it's answered, and it gets a weight, then there's a formula, and out comes the answer, 9. So you ask a question, should I go surfing tomorrow? And ChatGPT internally comes up with a 9. And since 9 is greater than 0, 0 is no in this case, it says, let's go surfing. So there's no agents, again, to repeat myself over and over and over, there's no agency involved. There's no person running down to the beach to check the waves. There's just a machine that pulls in what information it can find, runs it through some algorithms, and comes up with an answer. And then it translates or activates that into the language from which it was, the question was asked. Why is my slide not advancing? So here's the more complex version. And this doesn't even begin. I mean, we're talking about billions of inputs now with ChatGPT 4, and they're already working on ChatGPT 5. But again, this brings up this issue of what is the database? So here's a good time to pause and say, okay, so what information has been digitized? There's the first thing, because it's digital information. Again, ChatGPT is a little robot going down to the library and pulling a book off the shelf. It's looking for digital information. So the Western world has a lot of that. Southern world and Eastern cultures, not so much. And then there's the time frame. There's a lot of digital information since 1980. And there's most digital information has been in the last 10 years, I guess, depending on how you look at it. Our data scientists can correct me. But with the explosion of digital information, this tells you that most information is recent. And yet, ChatGPT-4 training set, from what I read, stopped in 2019. So if you ask it any questions about COVID or upcoming elections or any number of things that you would ask about contemporary events, it has no idea. Now, it may make something up for you, but it's not in its data set. And so this is a huge concern about the data sets. And again, these, even if the data set was open, it's too large to really be comprehended by a human. So all across the internet and journalism, especially technology journalism, ChatGPT and artificial intelligence and machine learning is being promoted everywhere. And I assume you see that, the same way I do. So here is a nice little image of just how these are being applied, to real estate, in our case, teaching and learning. It's everywhere. And I just love this image of a sound wave that just looks so much like these other waves. So I've been gently sliding over to ethics. And so at the Western Institute for Social Research, one of the organizations that they're connected with and integrated with, and to some extent, works on dignity and dignity studies. And so I think that this would be an appropriate approach for us at Wiser to look at machine learning, artificial intelligence, education technology, whatever angle we want to take, through a dignitarian approach, as they say. And this will allow us to examine how we use these technologies and when to use them, and to make sure that we keep ethics, human agency, and dignity in mind as we go forward. I just looked around the corner from Wiser to the University of California, Berkeley, or in this case, the University of California system. And they're, of course, concerned with this even more than we are. There's a lot more at stake in the multi-billion-dollar University of California system, and of course, the state university system, and then the community colleges in California. For those visitors that aren't familiar maybe with California system, it's an integrated system. What are we up to 20 universities? State universities, which include the technical colleges, what used to be agricultural colleges. There's 30 or 40 of those, and then there's 100. And again, it's so funny that in the age of information, there's either 113 or 114 community colleges, depending on who you ask, in the California community college system. And altogether, that's 3 million, more than 3 million students, although of course it's declining, just like everywhere else. So the University of California at Berkeley has an Office of Ethics. And so they put out guidelines. Of course, in research, this is a huge issue. And since UC Berkeley is an R1 institution, it affects their funding. I guess I could just say that. A couple of years ago, I was involved in a massive open online course. A friend of mine is Stephen Downs in Toronto, Canada, the co-inventor of the massive open online course. And he works for is it the province or the federal government? Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. I think it's the federal government as a researcher. And he has many interests. One of them is artificial intelligence and computer programming. And so he's developed his own system, which he uses as a learning management system, but he also uses it as a news reader. It also generates his websites and does his contacts and sends out his email. He has one system that does all that. He calls it Grasshopper because it's based on RSS feeds. It's very old, kind of cantankerous, but software, again, free and open source, freely available. If you just look for Stephen Downes and Grasshopper, you can download it and install it and use it as a learning management system or as an RSS feed reader. Anyway, we had this very interesting course over, it started to be 2 months. It, of course, dragged on. Stephen is a all but dissertation philosopher. And in addition to being a researcher and education theorist and education technologist. And so he set up this course, and because it's about the duty of care, which is a term that he borrowed and I borrow from Mahabali at the American University in Cairo, which I think is why we have friends here from that part of the world. She's involved in another open MyFest 23, another open learning opportunity that I'm involved with. And now I've lost my train of thought. Oh, and so Stephen set up this massive open online course to be so, what do I want to say? Anonymous is the word, but so caring of the individual and concerned with people's privacy, that's what I'm reaching for, that you can take this course without him even knowing that you take it. It's set up so that you can just go in and take all the materials and watch all the lectures, and there weren't any tests, of course, but it's freely available, it's online, and you can go there right now and you can take this course. You can watch the lectures and the discussions and read the supporting materials and all that. And you never even have to tell him that you're doing it. He doesn't track anything. During the course, all he's requested, it's here in the description, is if you sent him your email, he would send you the notifications, but not required. So this was for him a demonstration project of how education technology can be concerned with privacy and dignity and the duty of care, and not demand payment and enclose the information where it can't be accessed, especially by people who have difficulty in accessing online courses for whatever reason. And his software, I should add, is also very simple. And so there's not a barrier that you don't have to have a computer to access this. A phone is fine, a tablet is fine. So I did want to bring up, as far as ethics, here we are. Here's the first lawsuit in a United States federal court where the judge had to admonish the lawyers that they gave him fake references in a lawsuit in a federal court. So this is the new world. This is the world we're in. And it's a concern. Here's a recent paper exploring the limits of the law and ethical norms and protecting legal proceedings from lying lawyers. I like the way they didn't beat around the bush, because lawyers are responsible for things they say in court. And if you give fake references, that makes you a liar. So to education technology, this is what's coming to us as educators and learners, in my case. We're seeing these friendly little chat bots everywhere, and now they're free. You can go to GitHub, for those that are familiar with where code is widely available, and you can just download a little piece of code and you can put it on your website and you have a chat bot. And it's linked to GPT-4 or whatever machine learning or artificial intelligence you want to use, and away you go. You can interact with students through artificial intelligence. So from the research, now we're to the learning, or actually, I guess we've already started with the learning. I've been learning about artificial intelligence and these new technologies. As I mentioned, I've been interested in this deeply for a couple of years, but more generally for decades. And here's an image that I created on a Saturday afternoon while I was doing something, I don't even remember, and texting with a friend. And so he's in Arkansas, and his nickname is Scooter, and he was watching the Arkansas Razorbacks play baseball. And it only took a few minutes for me to create this image using software called Midjourney, which is only available on the Discord platform, which is a social media platform. And I sent it to him while we were talking. So this is just to me a demonstration of where we're at today with this. And again, this was a month ago. This technology has improved because it's adaptive and it's always learning. So I just throw all this text up here to remind me that I took Dr. McGilchrist's recent keynote at the AI World Summit in Amsterdam just last fall, where he warned them about getting too carried away with this technology and going too fast and letting it get out of control. And I took this transcript from YouTube and spent more than 2 hours, probably 3 hours, just editing the transcript. So just to show myself and to show you, this is just a excerpt. The slides will be available if you want to come back and read it. That's fine. But the language translation, language recognition still has a long way to go. That's my point with this slide. I spent hours to make this readable. It had no punctuation. Anyway. And so to me, this is a little audio file.
We refer to the question, what sort of creature man's next successor in the supremacy of the earth is likely to be? We have often heard this debated, but it appears to us that we are ourselves creating our own successors. We are daily adding to the beauty and delicacy of their physical organization. We are daily giving them greater power and supplying by all sorts of ingenious contrivances that self-regulating, self-acting power which will be to them what intellect has been to the human race.
We're already almost an hour in, and I wanted to save the majority of the time. So that was from 1863, read by a machine using Speechify, not free, but free to try. So I tried it. And again, I had to spend a couple hours editing the audio file to make it even that comprehensible. And if you listen to the whole thing, you know, you can understand it, but it's not very good. Now, of course, again, next month it'll be better. But there's no agency, there's no emotion. So we'll see how it develops. We're already seeing text to speech used well across, probably in commercials, certainly, and in films, and coming soon to a learning management system near you, I'm sure. So I want to finish. I wish I could finish on a nice positive note, but it's not my personality. So back to complexity and technology. Here's a drone swarm. Now again, self-organizing, adapting to their environment, machine learning, communicating. And if you think of the image of the Earth that I showed with the satellites and all the different communication technologies, this is where we're headed. I'm pretty sure there are people in different parts of the world that have had this experience already. I'll just say that. And my concern, which I brought up 2 years ago in the ethics course, and which I've been looking at for the last couple of years, is lethal autonomous weapons. These are out in the environment. This is not futurology here. This is what's going on. And so I show this image to prepare you for the next image. But on the left is a 50 caliber bullet. So the 50 caliber means it's a 1/2 inch wide. And the longest shot is over 2 miles, confirmed by a sniper. Now the little short one that sort of has a green case, that's a standard NATO round. It's the same as in America, if you've ever gone deer hunting. My uncles all owned 30-06 rifles. It's a very large, powerful rifle. In the case of my uncles, a single shot. It just holds one bullet and has a lever, and then you put another bullet in and take the next shot. Now, I'm sure that that's developed. I haven't hunted since I was a child, but I'm sure that's developed. But that's the standard NATO round. And again, those go up to 3/4 of a mile, and now they're making them in tungsten, with tungsten bullets, just to penetrate body armor. And that brings me to, this is for sale. This is that, they call them robot dogs. Here in Los Angeles, the LAPD just got given a robot dog by some organization of law enforcement officers that's a nonprofit that can just donate this to the LAPD to get around all the Democratic gates and all the public inquiry that would go into doing this. And so now Los Angeles has a robot dog. Now, not with the cannon on top, but that is for sale. The special purpose unmanned rifle takes those NATO rounds, and depending on how big a backpack it holds, it could spew out a few hundred of those, and connected to satellites and using facial recognition, you can see where this is going. So I can't talk about AI without mentioning the downside of where this is going. This unit here is for sale. And I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't guarding the perimeter fence somewhere. So here's a little AI image that I like. Again, you can shape it any way you want. It can be a smiling robot. It can be a world surrounded by satellites, or that image. So we do have almost an hour left. Sorry that took so long, but those are the thoughts I wanted to get out, the information I wanted to get out. And again, for our international visitors, the Western Institute for Social Research is a small nonprofit institution of higher education in Berkeley, California, that has no classes, has no courses. It has specialized in personalized learning since its founding in, remind me, John, 1984? 75. There, thank you. It came out of the University Without Walls movement. And so it has been providing alternate education since 1975. We have a new website, and so I encourage you to check it out. And you can see my contact information on the bottom. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and we will discuss where we think machine learning is going in higher education.
I'll just add that I read something the other day, some research that they've done on ChatGPT, and that one of the ways that some people have easily identified, of, they talk about plagiarism and the like. If something is done by ChatGPT, it has inadequate referencing. It doesn't reference where it gets its data, its information from. It just kind of piles it together, and so it doesn't give footnotes or appropriate referencing. I'm sure there's other more significant things to say about its limitations. That's just a small factoid I read about the other day.
Well, Microsoft Bing gives references, so it depends on which version you use. They're all ChatGPT.
They're not
but-
always correct. They're not.
No, they're not.
You have to check them.
Yeah, I mentioned that, but Bing does give references. It's the only one. So that's the one that I use. Not that I'm a fan of Microsoft, but and Microsoft owns OpenAI, which owns ChatGPT 4. So they're all corporate platforms. So I see people are being polite and raising their hands. So I guess I should call on Cassandra Upshaw.
So do you see a possibility? I mean, recently, PERS was hacked, and I'm thinking about FERPA and all the private data that's held at the college levels. So do you see an opportunity for that to just be stepped up by using AI as a tool to make it even more efficient to go in and sweep data and create all kinds of chaos with people's private information? Or theoretically private?
Yes, in a word.
Yeah, I knew you.
Because we already have, people that write programs that attack data centers. And
Yep.
so so you could say that those were created by humans to attack data centers. So now humans can tell AI to keep writing programs to attack data centers. So yeah,
Exactly.
it's like an arms race. And security, of course, is a huge industry. And so this is a boon to computer security industry.
Well, when we're done with this, I think I'll go freeze my credit.
Well, so I have to say that even though I insist on looking at the downside as well as the upside, we're all going to use this stuff, and all of our institutions are using it, our banks, of course, and our credit card companies and all of that. And so we'll see. So far, institutions are able to stay ahead of it. But again, we'll see. Hey, Robert.
I came in late. I, for some reason, thought it started at 11, but I have been running into, so I teach college, community college at CSU East Bay, and I am of the opinion that fighting AI is futile. Resistance is futile, and it's here, and I think we should find a way to use it. So I'm sure that you covered that earlier before I came on board. I have noticed, and so have many of my colleagues, papers are coming in now that are clearly AI written. The amount of editing you have to engage in to remove the patterns with which AI works is pretty significant, and most students don't do that. Maybe graduate students do, but as we see, lawyers are already not doing that, so what the hell? So in terms of plagiarism, in my classes, you must use the readings in the Canvas modules, and you have to justify using outside sources. And primarily what that means is ChatGPT, for example, does not know who Robert Brehm is. So if you must use my works as reference, and if you don't, in other words, an essay that does not follow the rules of my class will look different, and it'll catch my attention immediately. And I will catch that you've got references that have nothing to do with my class, in which case I don't have to get you for plagiarism. I get you for not following the instructions, and you get a 0. I've played with ChatGPT. There's a pattern that it tends to write essays in, and that's easily identifiable. But at any rate, I tell my students, if you're going to use AI in any way, you may use it as a place to start a conversation, but you should never use it as a place to end a conversation. And I do know there's been a couple of academic papers that have already been published where they acknowledge that they use ChatGPT as part of their, to help them get some of their research going. And they actually acknowledged it in the, not the author section, but the assistant section. So at any rate, my biggest curiosity is how to use this since it's here and there's no way to avoid it. I also come at it from both the positive and negative perspective. Being a Star Trek freak, I see the potential of AI incredibly, but also being aware of the Terminator. I typed in the chat, Skynet. I don't know if you're all aware of this, but defense experts from around the world met something like 5 or 6 years ago in Switzerland at a conference where they actually were debating, giving drones command and control through AI to make their own decisions, which of course is Skynet. That is the Terminator. That's the beginning sequence. So, and I remember commenting, do any of these people watch science fiction films? So at any rate, I'm a fan of AI, and I also am afraid of it. And I don't know if you mentioned that Stephen Hawking sees AI and income inequality as the two greatest threats to humanity. And he says the income inequality and billionaires are the ones who will use the AI, and the AI will eat them and eat us. So at any rate, that's just a comment I wanted to make.
Yeah. I tried to stay away from edge cases, so I didn't put up the letter of the 150 data scientists that said that AI is going to end life as we know it. I didn't go there. But I also didn't spend a lot of time promoting any particular platform. So I tried to just survey the landscape and let it go at that for this discussion. Christine has her hand up, and I'm just going from what I see in the order that I see them. So, and I see Emil, but Christine.
Okay, thank you. Two things, and one is probably really lame. Can you tell me what the words behind GPT mean?
Oh, I should have been prepared for that question. General something. So here's what I
Okay,
Generative pre-trained.
I tell everybody that I work with. Google it.
general what?
Generative pre-trained. What's the last word?
There you go.
General what?
Generative.
Generative
Generative
pre-trained. And then there's another word. Transform. Is that what it is? Can't forget. I forget.
Transformers.
Transformers. That's
Yeah.
it.
See, so again, GPT, what does it mean? Generative pre-trained transformers.
Pre-trained transformers.
What does that mean?
Why is it B? Why is it B then?
Who knows? So the
Or
generative.
maybe it is B trained. Let's just pretend it means
Pre-trained.
No, it is a P.
Put it in
It's
the
not a
chat.
B.
oh, it's
P.
P. Okay,
P. Yes.
thank you.
Pre-trained.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, then the next thing is, it's like what Emil said, because students regularly said, I'm going to look it up. And I say, that's fine if you look it up, but make sure you look it up from a juried source, because I'm going to ask you to show me where you got it, and then it came from a reputable source. And reputable means it's not like I got it from a pop source. I want to make sure that somebody who had a brain and a heart thought it through, and I'm going to be checking it. And then it goes like that. And remember, like Orlando, when we were looking at stuff, that's how it goes. And then the final thing is just for me and Ava, because she said, I did that thing, and it was with 2 words, and it's like reasonable and customary for the third-party payers, which is neither reasonable or customary. And that's like artificial intelligence, which is neither artificial nor intelligence. Well, the payments are neither reasonable nor customary, so ha, 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 ha. And now I'll be quiet. Thank you, because now I know what these words mean. Okay, I'll take my hand down. Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, now I'd point out that as far as requiring references, nothing's changed.
No. But
So,
they
and
can
especially
look
at Wiser, Wiser is always required peer-reviewed, published academic references. So nothing has changed, especially at Wiser. But that's true across academia. Even in community college, you can't get away with referencing Wikipedia. I mean, of course, you look at Wikipedia, but you have to go to Wikipedia's references to use those references. So, so again, we don't want to get too overwrought. But and the reason I didn't even mention plagiarism, because I knew everybody else is going to mention it, so because it is the issue. So Emil, welcome. Good to see you.
Yeah, and good to see you too. Yeah, I wanted to first start by responding to what Robert was saying. I think as an instructor myself, the whole access to ChatGPT started at around December, January. So I think I saw a lot of, I teach in French too. So I have students writing papers in French. It's a second language. So they also have access to Google Translate, which is phenomenal. Like its capacity to translate complex things into really good language. So, you know, so it's kind of now inevitable, and I've had to change all of my thinking around how to structure courses. And there's I do agree that we have to work with it. We have to especially teach students how to think critically with that capacity. And then another approach is simply to step away. I kind of make this joke where eventually you'll have ChatGPT generating fake papers, and then we'll have another piece of machinery that's grading them, right? So that we don't have to do it. We can just let the machine do it on the side, and then we can go sit on the lawn and have a conversation. And so that actually is the basis for some of my pedagogical approach coming forward, is that I'll include a lot more oral aspects, which I think benefit students anyway, because they need to be able to present things orally, and then handwritten exams. So it's kind of like balancing that kind of tension between the two of on the one hand, accepting the reality of technology and working around it, which I think most of my colleagues now are kind of doing. And then on the other hand, kind of going old school and sitting on the grass and talking proverbially. So yeah, and I think there's also, what's interesting is how we think about language. So the big, and also thought, what is thought? What is intelligence? And then this kind of connects to ethics, because so language, I worked with linguistics and philosophy. So one of the big distinctions is that language, yes, it's a communicative tool and it transmits information, but it's also a lot more. And so it does have a system. It is a system. And so artificial intelligence does match that. It also has a function. So does artificial intelligence. It's a set of functions that mimic or extend, or maybe even take it in ways that we couldn't even predict before. But at the other side, so beyond being merely a system, it's actually a world, and language is something that cannot be reduced to that system. And so hence we have the difficulty of translating. You know, we have poetry, which is untranslatable, and so on, because each linguistic act is infinite in itself. It can't be reduced. And of course, there are philosophical paradoxes associated with that, because if you have a unique enunciation using a general language, so there's some problems there. But so in a sense, what we're doing when we're in the world speaking is that we're instantiating something irreducible to a kind of linguistic system, a general linguistic system. And so that's one of the challenges that artificial intelligence has to face. And then it sort of, I extend that to ethics as well, because in a sense, ethics can't be thought of as rules. Yet a machine able to be ethical in a sense? Because, you know, the paradox with ethics is that if it's a rule that you're following, then it's not real ethics. It's just merely following through. It's not kind of like this open process of thinking that a machine so far can't do. And so, yeah, anyway, those are just a couple of reflections on what your presentation stimulated. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. Are you familiar with this Daniel Everett as a linguist?
No.
I think you'll find him interesting.
I mean, I know the name, but.
Oh, okay. See, I just stumbled on the name. But yeah, this is what I was trying to get at, that ones and zeros are amazing. You know, what you can do with ones and zeros, little tiny switches, what you can simulate is probably a good word, is amazing. But as far as ethical conduct, you know, morality, what I was thinking when you were speaking is what I should have put into my presentation is culture. Of course, language is embedded in culture. And Daniel Everett, as starting as an anthropologist and then now a linguist, that's his point of view, is that the language is directly tied to the culture. And that what I didn't really get into that some of those people were talking about is how much of what we do is driven without language. That was Cormac McCarthy's interest at the Santa Fe Institute, is how much we navigate our world unconsciously without language. We call it unconscious, but what, according to Everett and McCarthy, what we're really saying is without language. And I think, as you know, we've had these discussions, Emil. As a glassblower, I insist that one can navigate the world without language. And if we know dancers, we know musicians, and that's what they do. They navigate their world in other ways. And they certainly, to imply or infer that they're not intelligent is wrong, to put not too fine a point on it. And this, and we've had these discussions, not in the COVID era, but I'm looking forward to having more. Emil teaches at R1 for those people who understand that classification system. Teaches at an R1 in Canada, University of Victoria, and so is involved with all of these. And we met at the Digital Humanities Summer Institute, which is, I think, going on right now, or just finished. I guess it just finished at UVic. And so there's a lot of areas or academic areas that are involved. And that was part of the definition of complexity, is it's interdisciplinary. It doesn't, complex systems don't really care about your classification or your rule. And that reminded me, I was going to say to Robert, all of your materials are yours and, not searchable yet is the thing there. Yeah, all it takes is one student to put them on the internet, and there they are. But to your main point, Emil, is I see an opportunity, trying to be positive. I see a real opportunity to return to real teaching and learning. The Socratic dialogue. Because I joke too that, I don't know about your email, but mine offers to answer my emails now. I use Gmail, and it's starting now to say, hey, you want me to answer that for you? And so we're seeing we're on the verge of, emails being sent automatically and answered automatically and things scheduled automatically. And then, and as far as certification, automatically, design courses that are then automatically responded to by supposed students, and then they get a certificate or a degree.
Well, I guess extending my joke, you could have, for the administrative crap stuff that no one wants to do, you could just have two machines just figuring it out on their own on the side, just until we lose complete control of that. In any case,
that's the problem with losing control part. But I assume that you and most of the people here have tracked the transition from faculty-run institutions to administratively run institutions, and how the money has been shifted from the classroom to the administration building. This could maybe solve some of that, but who knows?
Well, I think, that opens up to, I'm thinking about Hannah Arendt here with the question of the technological and how, and it goes back to that ethics question of, you can follow through on rules and also systems and administrative processes and your Eichmann. And so, now with artificial intelligence being thrown in the mix or even taking over, it becomes multiply problematic. But at the same time, it might just be, it's just an extension of what's already been happening. Also, I like thinking about what you were saying, you know, about language as a technology. That's a very, in a sense, we've always already been artificial in a sense, because
That was the point.
language is, yeah, it is a technology. It speaks us rather than us speaking it in some cases. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where it ties into the culture, and the culture creates us. Yeah, it's all very fascinating. I didn't bring up, I guess we're just friends here. Harry, I can never remember his name. Harry Frankfurt, wrote one of my favorite little books. It's like 40 pages. You know, it's like a little pocketbook. When I worked in bookstores, I used to keep it on the counter and sell the heck out of it because it had a great title, On Bullshit. And he's a philosopher, I think from Harvard, but maybe MIT. I'm not sure. And the point is that in a speech act,
It's Princeton.
Princeton, okay, I knew it was back there somewhere, that in any speech act, you can be telling the truth, you can be lying, so you know you're not telling the truth, or you can be bullshitting. You can be just saying something to get what you want and not caring whether it's true or not. And I think that that's a really useful, I've been using that as a tool for 20 years now. What made me think of that was talking about the administration and all the rules and all the paperwork and all that that's been piled onto faculty in the last 20 years. David Graeber, who I guess was an anthropologist, again, a multidisciplinary thinker. And I heard him explain, he's unfortunately gone, died too young. But I think it was a Twitter chat where he used the term bullshit jobs when he asked, it was on Twitter, I think, right? And he said, so, you know, is the job that you do, you know, is it a real job or is it just bullshit? I mean, and he was just shocked by how accountants and lawyers and administrators and all kinds of people. Now, of course, no trash man is wasting his time on Twitter, but if he was, he would say, no, my job is important. I mean, somebody's got to pick up the trash, and plumbers and, you know, farmers, people like that would say, no, my job's not a bullshit job. But so many people said that there's such a thing as a bullshit job that he did a quick little research and wrote a little book on it, and pointed out how much of the professional managerial class and that part of our economy could be done away with. And that was before this explosion of ChatGPT. So again, maybe there's some hope there that this will be looked at, hopefully democratically, and decisions will be made by humans about what needs to be done and what really doesn't need to be done. And with the trajectory of higher education, with the decreasing enrollment and decreasing funding, that this will help make some hard decisions and we'll get more of the resources into the classroom. There's my positive take. So we'll see. Cassandra's had her hand up for a while.
So I was just thinking about all this conversation about languages technology. When I went to college, it was to become an elementary school teacher, and I studied in a really innovative program at SF State that focused on the most practical applications. And it was child and adolescent development. And I remember that we studied Noam Chomsky in terms of language acquisition and how it's inherent, it's inborn, that children are born with a need to express themselves, to understand language, and to encode and decode. And it's a biological function. So I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea of language as a technology that doesn't also acknowledge that it's a biological function, and that so much of our culture is encoded in our language. When you look at things like Eskimos have how many words for snow, and we have one, and the way that people understand and interpret the world, and how it's embedded in their culture and it's embedded in the language. And my concern, because of course I'm looking at concerns and worries for the future is that the more that Chat GPT becomes omnipresent, the more it's going to flatten that out, and the more it's going to accelerate the sameness. Mark touched a little bit on that in the presentation. That it's going to push the margins even farther out, and there's going to be a dominant culture that's even more beige and more the same, and we're going to lose words, and you know, things will be obfuscated by the general beigeness of everything. And so in higher education, I think it's really important to think about that, and also the interactions of cultures that happen, especially at the community college level, but in generally diverse places. Emile, so you teach in both French and English because you teach in Canada. So there's an interesting interaction there. So how do the conceptualizations that people express when they're thinking and speaking in French versus English versus a mix, you know, Franglish is its own culture. There's a subculture that's developing in parts of Florida right now, where the Spanglish thing is even deeper. I mean, it's intense. And so, and I also was thinking about, I'm sorry, I've had a bunch of ideas listening to you guys talk. I am an art nerd, and I'm working on my visual arts practice. And so I find that I'm also not much of a morning person. So I spend a lot of time touching on both hemispheres. When I wake up in the morning, now that I'm retired from Peralta, thank you, Jesus, I spend a lot of time just kind of lying in bed puzzling things, because that focus that happens in the left hemisphere and the broadness that happens in the right hemisphere, when you're in that liminal space where you're not quite awake, not quite asleep, that's where those two interconnect. And so I find that the use of language as I'm having a thought, because I'm kind of awake, I'm puzzling out how I'm going to solve this particular problem with this project that I'm trying to, you know, I can see in my mind's eye and I can describe it, but how do I actually make it happen? And then because I'm not completely awake, I go to the right side, and then something just all of a sudden pops up that I would never have thought of, ever, if I was completely awake and totally focused. And so I'm really concerned about us preserving that aspect of humanity, because ChatGPT, I don't think will ever have anything like that, ever. It's not possible, because the random firing of neurons in the brain can't be replicated that I could see, at least not in this lifetime. So just as we progress, and I'm not very confident because I've seen the way the world works, I'm not very confident that the greed heads who are going to be driving the uses of AI and ChatGPT and in the future are going to be ever able to restrain themselves from just profit and power. And so I think it behooves us to, both in an individual sense and in a structured sense, and a cultural sense, as a culture, as people connected in a culture, to hold on to that and to protect it and to preserve it, because I see a great deal of risk there.
Yeah, so the first thing I need to say is Daniel Everett, the anthropologist that became a linguist after working in the Amazon for a couple of decades, has had an ongoing refutation of Chomsky's biological basis of language. So he does come at it from a different point of view. And it's a fascinating, you know, there are very accessible you know, YouTube videos, magazine articles, and of course, journal publications refuting Chomsky's biological basis. That's where I brought up again that language is cultural. And Everett uses the, what word am I searching for? The model of how much is done unconsciously, which you pointed to yourself. You know, for us humans when we're asleep, but as Everett points out, for the rest of the life on Earth that doesn't have language, it learns, it uses tools. I shouldn't use it, actually. I should say they learn, they use tools, they communicate, they self-organize, from ants to birds, and on and on. So there's a discussion. Let's just say that language is biological. But and also recently being retired, I agree with you. It is nice to wake up with an idea and not have to go someplace, and to stay in that liminal state and let, is it unconscious? I mean, I was always uncomfortable with the word unconscious, but anyway, let the mind wander and work on those problems. And that's why I included that reference to the biologist, I guess it was, who solved the problem in a dream. And in the text of that, I don't like people who read slides, so I don't read my slides. So fast readers read it, or people that are interested in read it. But he talks about how the unconscious was aware of the problem. So even though the unconscious doesn't use language, it's aware of language, because otherwise you wouldn't dream about the things that you read about or are writing about. So it's just interesting that that these questions have come up again. I mean, these are eternal questions. So I guess we have to thank ChatGPT for bringing all this back to the forefront in culture about how do we learn? How does the mind work? What is consciousness? What are ethics? What is morality? And back to that, following rules. This is one of my problems with big institutions. I've always worked in small institutions. They're, even some of them, you couldn't even call them institutions. Startups is the term that we use in California. They're pre-institutional. And one of the reasons, besides that's sort of the basic form of my craft, one of the reasons I was attracted to my craft is that's the way it's structured. It's not a large institutional type of craft, and there aren't a lot of rules. And so there is room for creativity and interdisciplinarity to reach. As a glassblower, I've worked with chemists and geologists and physicists and computer people, obviously 20 years in Santa Clara, California, supporting the computer industry, but it was all based on my craft. And my experience was from inside a small shop where I was considered a journeyman. I avoid that term master. And people would listen to ideas on how to solve a problem that I might have picked up in a art glassblowing shop in Berkeley or at a glassblowing class at a university, even though we were in the most technological glassblowing shop I'm aware of. It allowed for that. And so to the point of being that these rules-based institutions, in my opinion, are often not moral, often, and especially we have several people here from the same community college system in Oakland, Peralta, a particularly dysfunctional higher education system, by all accounts, where the rules themselves are immoral. And so following an immoral rule, this can lead you down some very dark paths. And when we've all witnessed that in that institution in particular. So I'm just pleased because Cassandra, my friend Cassandra, is not an advocate of technology, let's just say that, but is forced to use it like everybody else. And so I'm glad that you came to this, and hopefully you get something out of it. And certainly check out Daniel Everett and his dialogue with Chomsky about where language comes from. It is fascinating. I've just became aware of it recently. Hey, Robert.
I just texted myself. I made a note, Mark. I'm going to study it so we can talk about it later.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. Yeah. Well, Robert's got his hand up again.
Yeah, a couple of streams came together. Let me try and organize the streams here. So language, as I understand it, human language is a biological imperative of humans. The cultural aspect is the specific languages. But it's only one way in which we engage in knowing. And a lot of it is systemic. that our entire body is our brain, effectively, but even then, it's our sphere of relationships and our body interacting with that sphere of relationships, which is our brain, which then starts to get into systems intelligence, like the intelligence of birds who create patterns when they when they fly, and
Murmuration.
and ants, et cetera, which then brings us to complex systems theory and how the logic of a system, that what happens within a system is chaotic, but it's constrained by it's a constrained chaos, constrained by the rules of the system. And so operating within the rules, patterns emerge. And so in a sense, systems make decisions simply by the patterns of interactions of the automatons within the system following the rules. And so then that brings back in Graeber's bullshit jobs. Basically, I mean, and Weiser knows this well. We have spent the better part of a decade engaging in a bullshit operation to get accreditation. Reports that maybe 20 people at most will ever read, that mean almost absolutely nothing in the real world of interactions between human beings. And I've been involved in accreditation with Peralta, and again, maybe 10 people will read that report that we write that's like 300-400 pages. And none of it has anything to do with what actually happens between teachers and students. But I can tell you how many meetings I've been to where most of the administrators are checking their Facebook pages during meetings that will make decisions about things that will never be acted upon. And so there is this whole world that says that AI will realize it doesn't need humans and will then seek to eliminate humans. I don't think that's actually the case. What'll happen is, and this is really perfect, as long as everybody's lives are consumed by bullshit jobs that do absolutely nothing other than keep you busy, that's the point. It keeps you busy. And so human beings won't revolt as long as they can eat. And so give them a paycheck, tell them to do something that has no meaning. And so the entire system gets run by the system itself. And so this brings in the whole notion of, again, back to systems. You know, a lot of people talk about conspiracy theories, about how there's a group of people running the world, et cetera. There isn't. The rules of the system have emerged over thousands of years. And the current iteration is the 21st century modern world system that's a capitalist world system. And even the billionaires are puppets within that system because the rules run the system and everyone plays within the rules and the rules themselves evolve. And so it looks like a conspiracy because we can't imagine that we're all just a bunch of ants operating. And so at some level, what does an individual human being do? Some level, you have to make peace and decide that you're just going to enjoy your life and not hurt other people. And maybe on occasion, you'll do something that has an impact and enjoy that. I don't know. I'm feeling particularly dark at the moment. So I don't know if I made any sense, but I was just sort of going through, trying to tie together all the thoughts I was having with nothing coherent. There was a few coherent moments, but then they dissipated. So. But I would like to continue this conversation. By the way, shout out to Cassandra. You retired, you got out. Congratulations.
Yeah, I think this is one of our, I'll just make it personal. This is one of my main problems, is we're embedded in these systems that have evolved for a long time. And, you know, as an individual, what can you do? And if you look at them as complex adaptive systems, you realize that you cannot predict what will happen after you make changes. So you can have perfectly good intentions and make what you consider to be a positive change, and the outcome is not only not predicted, but can often be unpleasant or counterproductive, however you want to look at it. This is why I wanted to contextualize this in complexity and chaos. And I'll say it again, that chaos theory speaks to how you can create a complex system with a few simple rules. So it's generative, to use that word from the ChatGPT definition. But that is sort of the inverse of a complex system, because a complex system is so complex, you can't determine what the rules are. And between these two frames or facets, however you want to look at it, those are two different ways to look at the systems that we're embedded in and how we can hopefully make some positive changes. Personally, being from California, I constantly am looking back to 1980. Before 1980, California was one kind of place, especially education and higher education. And after 1980, it's changed trajectories because of political decisions. And to me, it sort of led the world into this neoliberal dystopia that we're all grappling with. To me, it started with the election of Ronald Reagan. Of course, there were things before that, but that to me was sort of the stake in the ground, or the historical moment where everything changed. And I continually go back to that as I bump into current problems, current events, political issues, whatever. It all goes back to that, because it was in the 60s and the 70s that we were on a trajectory of multiculturalism and, all these things that were considered good at the time. And now those very same things have been weaponized and are using against us, educated, liberal, whatever, PMCs, there's all kinds of ways to designate us. And to me, the pivot was around 1980, not any one specific event, but just that's when, to me, the culture changed and the language changed. And part of the changing of the culture was the changing of the language. That's George Lakoff, again, out of Berkeley, that pointed out how you frame issues, you can control the debate just by the words you use. And so we've been watching that. So that's almost 50 years? For more than 40 years. So here we are. I see Christine's back with her hand up, and I'm looking for Tom I'm in another group where Tom loves to jump on stage and talk to us. He's written a couple of books around these subjects and teaches at a community college. I don't know if he's still with us. He was in the chat. Oh yeah, here he is. So I'm seeing hands raised, Tom. So please raise your hand and jump in after Christine. Where's that mute button, Christine? It's there somewhere.
Okay.
There it is. Oh, you muted yourself again.
And then it went away. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. The reason I wanted to speak now, it's a generative comment to your friend Cassandra, who said, you said she's not really techie, and so did she, but she wrote a comment in the chat about how there's a lot of words in her dreams, and it's a way that language speaks to her. And one of my favorite dream guys is Michael Meade. So I wanted her to write his name down, Michael Meade, M-E-A-D-E, because he invites us to lean into our dreams, because we are the speakers into our dreams. And if we do that, it opens up our world. We don't have to look it up. We just lean into it, and it is so cool. And I use it with all the people with whom I work, and it just opens up our world. And so I just wanted to share it with her because she's your friend. And so I thought, isn't that so nice? And he's such a nice guy, and it's a way to just have something nice in addition to today. So that's it.
Thank you, Christine. I put it in the chat. So,
Yeah.
and thanks for spelling it because I wouldn't have put the E on the end.
No,
So,
I know, that's why I spelled it, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I put it in the chat so everybody can see it. So
Perfect.
Tom, I am interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think one of the things that we miss a lot, that the current moment is that we fail to recognize just how much this is part of a continuum. I don't think AI as it's constructed right now is a massive leap. It is a incremental leap over with technologies that we've been working on for, as you say, going back to the 50s, if not before that. One of my favorite bits of trivia is that the study of neurology came out of computer science, not the other way around, because it made us think differently about how the brain works. And we started to study modern neurology in a completely different way. It was a black box before the 1930s, 1940s. So, we build these technologies. Yes, language is a technology. Cooking is a technology. Clothes are a technology. I mean, these are all things that have reshaped how we work as human beings. We accept them as normal. I mean, that Douglas Adams quote you had on one of the slides is one of my all-time favorite quotes because it very much summarizes that. I think Douglas Adams actually had a really good view of technology. I wish he was still with us to be able to comment on what's going on right now, because I'm sure he'd have some choice words. But I think a lot of times, we tend to miss the forest for the trees. I think there's an absolute, yes, increments may be tiny or vast, but it's more our reaction to the increments, I think, that is really what's driving a lot of what's going on. Generative AI is really not that different from in a lot of ways the way we construct things. I mean, think about how you construct something creatively. A lot of times, just there's a lot of writing exercises where you're just sort of doing random poetry or random random words and putting stuff together. The refrigerator magnets, right? Remember the Shakespeare on the fridge and that sort of thing. So,
excuse me, Tom. Vanita, can you mute yourself? Vanita? Thank you.
So, I mean, I think a lot of times that we look at this as some sort of magic, but I mean, we do magic all the time, and they're also incredibly stupid humans who put together random bits of words and somehow they're considered brilliant. And so, this is all part of the same continuum. But I did have a really interesting thought as Robert was making his comments a little while ago. Like, wait a minute, maybe we've already built our AI. We did that centuries ago as we built the industrial infrastructure that's gradually grown on all facets of our lives. I mean, the way that we live today in systems, and we lived in small systems before the Industrial Revolution. We lived in the systems of the village or the farm or the clan or the community. But now we live in industrialization scaled that, because now all of a sudden we had to be part of an actual machine. We became cogs in the factory wheel. And yes, education is absolutely a part of that. I mean, our students are our product. The faculty are merely cogs in the wheel of education. As you were saying earlier, I think Robert was talking about accreditation, and that's just greasing the wheel. And it's saying, okay, our cogs work as well as the ones at the other factory. And so, these things are all absolutely the same in many ways if you abstract them enough. And I get into trouble with technologists sometimes because I have an extremely broad definition of technologies. Bureaucracies are technologies. I'm a political scientist by training. Bureaucracies are technologies. They're built to do a very specific thing. And whether they do it well or not is a completely different conversation. But we all have technologies that don't work particularly well either. I'm sure that there's an awful lot of, you remember the old flashing zeros on the VCR and things like that. I mean, the user interface errors that we encounter on a daily basis, right? So why should we expect technologies of organization to work, to be any different? But we should hold them to the same standard. And that's the thing we kind of lose sight of, is that, education, and I think this is one of the problems with artificial intelligence, or one of the challenges, is it directly confronts the the brokenness of education. It creates the idea that you can easily game tests. Well, why are we doing tests? They're a product of industry. I mean, they're basically mass producing learning in a way that's not terribly meaningful, to be honest. And so we should rethink how we do assessment because of that. I haven't done tests in my class for years, and that's very intentional. So we need to be working with technology. I mean, AI is an incredible potential to create some very powerful and interesting tools that we should be able to play with as humans. And the big threat in AI is not the technology. And by the way, we can't stop it. These people are saying, "Oh, we should stop it for 6 months." You can't do that. It just doesn't work. It's like, "Oh, let's undo this atomic bomb thing." It's going to cause all sorts of trouble. I mean, I'm looking forward to Oppenheimer this summer because I definitely know his thinking on that. So technology is a thing that runs on its own. We have no control over it. If we don't build it, someone else will. If it's possible, we'll do it. That's part of being human nature. The problem is reaction. I mean, and we're spectacularly ill-equipped as human beings to react effectively to these things. But that's not limited to technology. Look at politics. Look at what you were just talking about a minute ago, Mark, about the narrative BS that is politics. Well, that's not AI generated. That's human generated. And yet we still buy it, because we have lousy thinking skills. And that's where AI is going to challenge us as human beings. And can we overcome that? That remains to be seen. We've survived atomic weapons so far.
What's that?
I said we've survived atomic weapons so far. They're at least as dangerous to stupidity. We had to learn how to use atomic weapons too. I don't mean use them, but how to live with them. The first 20 years of the Cold War were incredibly scary because we thought we could win it. Curtis LeMay, oh yeah, sure, let's take them out while we can, right? That sort of stuff. It took 20 years of experience and butt clenching moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis to teach us the lessons necessary. Fortunately, we learned the lessons before we had to live with the consequences of not learning the lessons in a way that would have been catastrophic for all of us. The stakes are high, absolutely. But it takes us time to adapt to these things too. But the good news behind AI is that it's kind of amorphous. It's not like we're giving him control of those nuclear weapons. I know you and I were talking a few weeks ago about a movie called Colossus, which I highly recommend. If anybody, if you want to see a dystopian AI future, but it's a B movie, but it's an A science fiction premise, as I would normally describe it. But anyway, so
yeah, it's available. I went and watched it.
Yeah, good.
Very good recommendation. Thanks. From 1971. I missed it.
Yeah.
I was in high school, but I missed it the first time.
I don't think it got a huge amount of release, to be honest.
Probably not. So, as a political scientist, are you familiar with accelerationism?
Not as
a
term,
political theory?
Not as a term, but if you describe it to me, probably I will.
So it's over there on the anarchist edge of politics.
Okay.
That says, hey, let's see if we can't make things get worse faster. And then we'll get the change that we need.
Yeah.
I think AI is playing into that political position.
Sure.
Just because of the acceleration part. And to me, that's the worrisome thing, is that it's going so fast. And with the nuclear weapons, we actually negotiated with other countries. Well, now we're in this political position where we won't even talk to other countries. And so and I didn't emphasize this, I think, in retrospect enough. Now these corporations, these transnational, international, global corporations that own this technology are going to be able to have their way with us, that I'm not really looking forward to.
So and this is something where I think universities have an absolute role to play. And that is, we need open AI systems, and they need to be open fundamentally. And I think that if you look at how innovation happens, innovation does not happen in closed systems. So if we really want innovation that benefits humanity especially, but we want innovation in general, there's an innovation advantage to having open systems that is just is a distributed network. I mean, look at what's the flourishing of the internet over the last 30, 40 years until fairly recently when it's become much more closed down. And but there's still patches here and there that hopefully will survive. But I think
I
that
think of it
AI
as the new enclosure.
yeah.
If you're
I don't-
familiar
I-
with the enclosure laws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that AI there's a real potential for if we open it up those systems will actually have an advantage over the closed systems. As long as we have the horsepower to run the stuff, and this horsepower is getting smaller. And so I'm watching with great interest in some of these open Libre projects and things like that that are built on relatively light platforms where you don't have to dim the lights in a medium-sized city in order to run a simple query. And that's the other thing about technology is it gets smaller and lighter, which is both good and bad. I mean, nuclear weapons, you don't need a B-29 specially modified in order to haul one weapon anymore. You can put it in a suitcase. So that's a way in which it becomes a little hairier. But in general, technology gets smaller and lighter. And look at it, what we've done with computers. I mean, what I'm talking to you on right now, I could carry around. It's a 2-pound piece of equipment. Whereas and plus I have another one hanging off of my belt, which weighs a hell of a lot less. But you think about the computing power of that and compare it to what it was like in 1970, when the AI stuff was getting going. So yeah, I'll shut up. But
Now, one of the people that didn't make the cut because I already had too many slides was the guy that started Eleuther. It's some Greek word, Eleuther AI. It's open source. And so he's young. So and so I looked around. He doesn't document stuff except on YouTube because he's young. So, and I can't remember his name. I'll get it here in a second. But so he's working exactly on that issue of creating open source AI that can be used, by educational institutions and nonprofits.
And I think educational institutions actually should take ownership of this. And
well, they had
develop
ownership and they let it get away.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's time to take it back. And the beauty behind the lightweightness of this technology is that it's no big deal to recreate it, to be honest. The algorithms are not that complex. And it seems like, again, because people don't understand it, people think computers are complex and yet they fit in your pocket, right? But ask somebody to explain an iPhone.
Well, and that's, part of the training I do with educational institutions and with other business clients is just explaining to them how their phone works, how a computer works, and all the layers of technology. The young man's name is Connor Leahy, and Eleuther AI, and he came out of another group whose name I don't remember. But one of the, again, I was thinking earlier today, I should have quoted Mark Twain. I would have made a shorter presentation, but I didn't have time. So Connor didn't make the cut. But one of the really hopeful things is to get these open source, lighter, trainable AIs to use for research on your own documents. Like I did I stumbled onto that idea a few weeks ago, and I did a quick search. And of course, we all have duplicates on our machines, but I had probably 100,000 documents. My search using the little black box whose name I can never remember because we don't use it very often, where you actually get into your own computer system. I read on how to do it. It's a quick search, and it shows you how many objects are stored on your machine. And I had almost a couple 100,000, but a lot of duplicates. So, but I say easily 100,000. And one of my projects that I've continued to fail at for probably about 6 years now is figuring out how to put that stuff into a graph database so that I can start to make the connections between it And now that if I can get a little piece of cheap open source AI, I would be able to do that, be able to automate that,
Mhm.
where I could generate probably 80% of the cross references of is referred to who and who went to college with who, and
Mhm.
all of that on all the stuff on my machine, so that I could
Right.
use the stuff that I've collected, and then you expand that to libraries and academic libraries, and away you go. And so I see a huge change
Yeah.
in research along those lines.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I've been talking about a lot lately with assessment is that, we need to go to tangible work products. We need to get away from early computing model, grade point average, 4.0, whatever, all of that meaningless BS, and get to something where somebody can actually see what you can do, right? The problem with that is searchability and discoverability, and that's where AI would be useful. So that if I'm an employer or a grad school or a college recruiter or whatever, I can go out and search using advanced AI tools to find all of the students or all of the employees that do exactly, or have done some Genesis version of exactly what I need them to do in my job, as opposed to some meaningless cipher that says, hey, this guy's got an architecture degree. And then they get in there and that's great, but you can't do architecture because you just studied the theory and not done anything real with it.
So as you're aware, there are whole sections of higher education that are interested in project-based learning.
Right.
Right. And again,
but I take it
5 or
further than
6
that,
years.
because it's really about to me, tangible work objects is really about owning your product. I mean, think about how little our students actually own from their educational experience. You give a test, it winds up in somebody's file cabinet for 3 or 4 years, and then it's shredded because of FERPA reasons and things like that. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's work down the toilet. And
Those are disposable.
It
right?
doesn't, the exercise of doing it may have got some marginal benefit, but you lose 90% of the effectiveness of the teaching experience. So, and
I had
the problem is finding stuff.
I had a conversation with Mark Prensky after one of Brian Alexander's Trends in Education forums, where Tom and I met, and Prensky's at Stanford, and we had a conversation afterwards. And he said the exact same thing. This again 4 or 5 years ago. He said nobody cares what you studied. People only care what you can do for them.
Exactly.
And we were talking about, one of my interests is e-portfolios. And so to do non-disposable assignments, project-based learning that a student owns, puts on the domain of their own, which is another group of people out of the University of Mary Washington in Virginia, who have been encouraging
Jim Groom, right?
Jim Groom and Brian Alexander and Jesse Stommel, and that whole group has been encouraging students to make academic products that they share on their own domains, and so they become useful. And then, so it's 5 or 6 years ago. COVID changed a lot of things. So for a few years until COVID, I was on the technology special interest group of the Association for something Educational Assessment, ABEL, ABEEL. I can never remember what the acronym is. And I proposed that we create an ontology, a vocabulary for academics, so that we could tag these products, so that they would be searchable around the world, across the internet. And so again, that still plays into this graph database, and it all gets down to computer science, and back to my favorite American philosopher, Charles Peirce, who came up with the concept of nodes and edges 150 years ago, right? He was like the original information theorist. And
so imagine an AI creating that ontology for you. That to me is the real next step.
Yes, and again, as long as you had a committee to review it, so that it had final editing and approval by humans. The United Nations is big in lifetime learning, or in California, you get the university system, but to have some group of academics who are qualified, not certified, qualified, to then review it,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but with AI, you don't actually have to. I mean, you have to have an ontology, but close enough is good enough for AI.
Sure. Well,
and so you got
natural
to
language. Yeah.
exactly, and that's
Yeah.
where, because ontologies are also mechanisms of control. I mean, just
Yes.
look at the Dewey Decimal System and
Yeah.
its priorities and things like that. I mean, these
Yeah.
are, so with AI, yes, it's a mechanism for control, and we need to understand the algorithm. But I think we can use AI to open doors rather than close them, and that to me is a real opportunity.
I was
that I think people
proposing that we
overlook.
do it from the bottom up to
Yeah.
take agency as academics and learners, but
Yeah.
that went nowhere. And
Yeah.
so
That's heavy
since
lifting.
that went
And I
nowhere,
can
I
see why
agree with
that
you.
went nowhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So AI could provide that function, hopefully.
yeah.
So Robert, jump in here. He's got his hands up.
Yeah, I know.
So Robert
Yeah.
teaches at community college also.
Yeah, I teach political science and psychology and public administration. And yeah, so much from the time I raised my hand to the time we are now, so many ideas
That's what happens.
have flown
You should have
out.
just unmuted and jumped in anyway.
I know. Yeah, a couple of things. One very practical. I think that it wouldn't be the worst idea if a few of us here present and maybe some others got involved in a fairly reoccurring, maybe even weekly discussion group to possibly develop our ideas in discussion and salon type fashion, and perhaps, I don't know, try to explore ideas. So that said, God, I have so many streams of thought right now, and I'm trying to sort them out. What I'm most fascinated with in my life now currently, which is where I want to spend most of my extra time while I'm not dealing with bullshit reports from work. I am interested in consciousness, and the expansion of consciousness. I have become very fascinated with Hegel, again, as I've been fascinated with Hegel, but not just Hegel, with a number of other thinkers. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin is one. Barbara Marx Hubbard is another, and Martin Seligman out of the University of Pennsylvania, and in combination with all of the above and many other people in my life that I've worked with, the human project in history is the expansion of human consciousness and agency. And so what I keep running into is the limits of being a meat sack. I loathe and detest human embodiment. It's just so limiting. And I'm just so ready to be done with it. I mean, I would love to upload my consciousness and just be freed from the limits of this, this biology. I'm so frustrated. I go through life frustrated all the time. Being a child of Star Trek, I keep being aware of what we could have and we do not have. And so I'm always angry. I'm always just discontented. It's like, I'm pissed off that computer systems don't talk to one another. And then I look at this idea of, you've got, for lack of a better term, there's the light and dark side of the human psyche. That we've got these political ideologies of control and political ideologies of release. I mean, the entire university system is under assault from political ideologies on the right, and shutting down.
And the left.
The left, yes, in a different way.
There is an authoritarian left that has grown.
There is an authoritarian left, but and yes, you're correct. I'll give that to you. But they don't have the power. The power is...
They're getting there.
Well, currently, I am most concerned with the religious right and the DeSantis arm, and it's now becoming the DeSantis-Trump arm of the Republican Party. That's a global movement. Illiberalism is a global movement. And so, yes. All right. So let's just put it down to human beings destroying one another with their stupid neuroses.
The death drive, someone called it.
The Thanatos, yeah.
Yeah.
Or Thanos, no. For those of you who are comic book fans. I don't know what I'm trying
Lemmings
to get
will
at.
do.
I'm not sure what I'm trying to get at here, but essentially this. I'm fascinated with a neuroscientist by the name of Daniel Siegel, who gives many presentations in the psychotherapy world, and so playing with his ideas, I'm looking at how to expand human consciousness, and more specifically, how to expand my own consciousness. Mark, I was fascinated with. I would hate to find out how many computer files I have in my systems, and I have no way to access 90% of it. And
That's another issue.
if I could plug my brain into my computer and just interact with the speed of the computer to get at my own files, I would be happy. And
That's the standard Siegel, Seagal.
yeah, basically
Daniel Siegel,
Siegel. So what Siegel talks about is the wheel of awareness, and he uses it as a psychotherapy tool, but I use it as looking at how human consciousness actually functions. So our embodied first 5 senses are just the first 5. When we bring those first 5 into sort of a synthesis, they become a 6th sense. When we become able to navigate the 6th sense consciously, that becomes our 7th sense. When we realize that we are in a relational wheel of awareness with other people, our 8th sense is the relational sense. And I have found that to be intensely true, that when we work in teams that can actually get some kind of a rhythm going, like a dance troupe or a chorus, we can actually create great expansion in consciousness. Just in this conversation this morning with these other people, we're creating what Rupert Sheldrake calls a morphogenetic field of learning, a learning field that we create ideas that I cannot do alone. So I have to first off get my internal world together up to the 7th sensory level of awareness, but then I reach the 8th sense. So then I go beyond Siegel and bring in eco-psychology. When I can achieve my awareness of my oneness with planet Earth, that's the 9th sense of eco-awareness, or that I can, if I can be in touch with planet. Then if I move to what I call the 10th plus sense, is when you become aware that you're part of the oneness of the solar system, which I call Helios consciousness. Is that when we realize that planet Earth is not the center of the solar system, that the sun is?
No.
I know, right?
What?
And some of you may recall that in my office, I won't play with my camera right now, but in my above my desk here at work, at my home office, excuse me, at work, that's funny. But my old office, I have this image of the sun in back and behind me there. And to me, that's always to remind me to always decenter to Helios consciousness. And once you realize, and I say 10 plus, once you realize that the sun is the center of the solar system, you're ready to start saying, well, maybe the solar system isn't the center of the universe. And so it's the idea of how do we decenter our consciousness. I am persuaded that if at some level I could ever empower my mind to be freed of the biological limitations, like the fact that I might be needing to do something, but I got to go to the bathroom, that pisses me off, that I have to deal with other human beings that are not committed to the same things I'm committed to. I know that my mind is probably just firing in 50,000 different directions right now. But I want to be freed from the stupidity that we're surrounded with, so that we can finally harness the capacity to expand our consciousness and the possibility of free will. And I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm not making any sense to myself right now, so I'm probably not making sense to you. But at any rate, this was all because the ideas started flowing so fast, and I worry that maybe neurological powers are slowed down, so maybe I would have
So
been
the
better
sign
at
I
this.
remember is the one about never underestimate groups of people. But
Yeah.
anyway, and I have to be, we have definitely run over time, but I have no place to go, so I'm fine.
I may have to
Um,
bail in a few minutes here, but yeah,
I
two
did wanna
people is a
comment on your
conversation, three
background,
people is a
Tom.
committee, right?
Yeah, yeah. I did want to comment on your background, Tom, that your very large array there,
Yeah.
Plains of St. Augustine. My mother was born in, I think, the closest village to the very large array, the VLA. If not the closest, the second closest village. So I spent a lot of time
Name.
in that. Magdalena.
Oh yeah, I know Magdalena. Sure.
Are you in New Mexico, Tom?
No, I'm in Texas.
Oh, in the very large array in New Mexico, isn't it?
It
is.
is. It is.
Oh, good.
It's about 30 miles west of Socorro.
So where are you in Texas, and how do you feel about academic freedom?
Outside of Houston. Well, feel and act are two different things. I act as if I have academic freedom, and I'm like, well, you know what? If I can't teach the way I need to teach, then screw you. I'm not teaching.
Right.
So, I'm just gonna. I mean, I have never been accused by a student of being of proselytizing, and so I definitely know where that line is. And that's not my job. My job is to get them to think critically.
Right.
And at the end of the semester, I'm always excited. I mean, if half my students think I'm a liberal and half of my students think I'm a conservative.
Good job.
That's gotten harder because it's become more of a dichotomy between being rational and being stupid. And so it's a little harder to fake the stupid and to maintain my academic integrity. So that's the challenge, honestly. But I actually had a conversation with actually I probably should talk about this on a recorded session, but
it is being recorded.
Yes, I'm going to withdraw that. I'm going to withdraw the end of that story for that reason. But I talk about things like redlining in my classes, for instance, because hey, that's a fact. There's no getting around that and the consequences of that. And so, is that critical race theory? Hell no, because I know what critical race theory is, but does that mean we have systemic racism in this country? Yeah, it does. Actually, it does. And there's a lot of evidence to support that idea. And the idea that somehow everyone has an equal shot at making it in this world or in the United States. I mean, the other stat that I love to point out, is recently they measure social mobility. We have less social mobility than Great Britain, and they have a freaking king. I mean, what the hell? Right. And aristocracy. Right. So yeah, that's all a load of crap. And it's just mythology that people are selling us. So that sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely. The statistics and stuff, but I also know you can lie with statistics too. One of my favorite books that I occasionally wave at my students is How to Lie with Statistics, which is a classic from the 1950s. You should definitely look it up if you have never looked at it, because it's a nice short book, and the data is a little out of, I mean, the numbers are a little out of date, but the ideas are absolutely spot on.
Well, now you have weapons of math destruction.
Yeah. But I think a lot of times we overcomplexify these things. I think we really need to be able to step back and say, what exactly are we trying to do here? I mean, what are these algorithms really meant to do? And then then you can start saying, okay, this is how we need to be thinking about how to deal with them. How do we regulate them? I mean, one of my things about regulation is I think we need to regulate transparency. I think we need to regulate transparency in AI. I think we need to AI and algorithms, it's all the same thing, just different label. But I think we need to regulate transparency and simply say, look, if you're going to manipulate people, you need to tell us how you're manipulating people. We understand that you're manipulating people. I'm manipulating somebody right now just by talking to you. I mean, come on. I manipulate people who read my stuff. It's called being a writer, So, I mean, we all do it. We just, we need to be more transparency. The problem is when we pull that pull that process away from people. I mean, that's what people talk about when they talk about, good journalism versus bad journalism. Good journalism reveals process, because then you go back and you see, where do these sources come from? Which sources do you have? One of my favorite movies of all time is All the President's Men. And where Ben Bradley comes out and goes, oh, and they go, well, we got a confirmation from another source. He goes, okay, we'll get a third one, or something like to that effect. That's not good enough. 2 isn't enough, right? So these are things this is what good journalism does. And the reason the media sucks so bad now is that they don't have time to do this. It's
Well,
not,
they're not
yes,
journalists. They're
Yeah,
story
it-
writers.
well, so journalists are always going to be story writers.
No,
They're
no.
always
I
gonna-
mean, there's these grand narratives.
yeah, right. And they have to conform to the narrative.
So folks, I'm going to actually need to go.
Oh, okay.
We're going to see the early showing of the Star Wars burlesque show
Oh God.
in Seattle.
Well, we're
But
about.
at any rate,
I need to
I
take
would-
my wife to the airport soon too.
I
so.
would like to continue this conversation. Tom, Mark, and Ava
Sure.
and Christine are still here, but this is a sort of conversation that needs to unfold over time, without an end limit and without necessarily an agenda to it. But it wouldn't be the worst thing if we could find a way to capture it and maybe derive some, stuff that we could all use, perhaps. But yeah. Oh yeah, I see in the chat, Daniel Siegel, he refers to MUI, which is, that is very huge.
Mhm.
So you can watch some videos with him, and I can even, maybe we could have a Zoom session where I share with you the video that I was able to record from the last Evolution of Psychotherapy conference. That was one of the strengths of watching it on Zoom. I can record a Zoom session. At any rate, I will talk with you all later. Thank you, Mark, for your work.
Thanks.
And Tom,
fun.
good to meet you. Christine, thank you. Ava, didn't you hear your voice, but hello. And goodbye.
Hello and goodbye. That's a Beatles song.
Right.
Ubuntu is that concept of we. That,
Yeah, he has the MUI that is the synthesis of the connection among people. He's a wonderful man.
yeah, I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah, I've met him and I've watched him present in a lot of conventions and things. I work with wellness and he comes there a lot. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. Mhm.
And from a systems perspective, I mean, things like Stephen Johnson's liquid networks. I mean, that's really, I use that a lot in thinking about how, we collectively grow things. And I wrote a blog about this a few weeks ago where I said, I'm a good synthesizer. That's my superpower. I pull odd things together in any given statement. But and should I be worried about AIs, because that's what they're doing? They're synthesizing at speed. And I'm like, no, actually, I think it's great, because now I can stand on their shoulders and synthesize even more in ways that they can't, right? And learn crazy. I mean, I use it as a stimulus I use ChatGPT to write rough drafts all the time now, just to see what it comes up with. Not to say I'm going to use it, but I want to see what it comes up with, and then go, okay, that's an interesting narrative. I need to think about that narrative a little bit and then write my own. But I use that in my classes too, by the way. I teach my students that way. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're going to have to adapt, and I think academics or teachers need to show their students how to use it.
yeah,
And how to,
oh, absolutely. If you're not teaching ChatGPT at this point, you're
you're out of the
engaged
loop.
in malpractice, honestly, because it's going to be in that way. I do think it is a transformative technology, and it's happening. Everything happens a little bit faster than the last time, right? And so computers took a while to percolate, but then when we started connecting them together, not having that, getting that collective mind, the hive mind, as Kevin Kelly liked to put it, then if you didn't have that, then you were left out of the conversation. And then when it came to creation and social media and all that, if you got left out of that, it became a bigger and bigger problem. That's what I call the disconnect, is that as these new technologies come on and we don't adapt to them, the systems that we have increasingly become disconnected from reality. And that's certainly true of education, because our systems are still based on 1950s era technology. And so
Yeah, and the gap is growing wider. I mean, so then there's the
Yeah.
whole inequality in the access.
It's not slowing
you know.
down. Exactly.
No, it's accelerating.
And we
that's-
can't stop
that's a
that.
problem.
We
No.
cannot stop that. The
We
idea
have to
that we
try
can
to
sort of-
mitigate.
Well, we have to shape it. We have
Yeah.
to design it.
Yeah.
That's what we should be teaching our students is design. That's what I
Yeah.
teach my students is design, critical thinking, design, and how do you design narratives? How do you design ways of telling stories? How are other people trying to design them for you, so that you will believe certain things? I mean, these are all critical skills. It's much more than digital literacy. By the way, digital literacy is not. I hate the word digital literacy because it's just literacy. I mean, come on. Just because somebody put it on a screen doesn't make it any more relevant. Mein Kampf was a published book. Never forget that.
I use the term fluency, but I
Yeah.
do see that there's a difference between digital fluency and non-digital fluency. The reason
It's
it's
just
so
speed.
apparent is, but I work with academics. And I
Right.
work with a lot of academics that have resisted digital technology for 30 or 40 years,
Oh, I know.
rendering themselves digitally illiterate.
Yeah.
And they have tenure.
Yeah.
So
I know. work with them
you know
too.
as well as I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is a thing, And then there's the whole thing of assuming that young people are digitally fluent. Well, they're great at TikTok, but that doesn't mean they understand computing or artificial intelligence or
Yeah.
whatever. So, yeah, it's fascinating. It's a good time to be alive.
Yeah, I know. We live in the most amazing time, But speaking of time, I do have to bail essentially too. But I do have one parting thought for you, Mark. Go Astros.
I was wondering about that orange shirt. We'll discuss that more later. And just for the recording, I don't know how to pronounce their name, but Galal or Halal asked if the recording will be shared. And so, yes, the slides have been shared. The list of resources, which I think is over 200. I just been throwing
Yeah, that's an
them
amazing
the list,
bibliography you've assembled there. I'm impressed.
Well, I was practicing my bibliography because there are podcasts in there and videos and blog posts, and it's just interesting that I use MLA because, well, no need to go there. I use MLA, and it's interesting that it's keeping up. So I use Purdue OWL to keep up with MLA, and anyway, so yeah, it's a great list, and it's set up so that you can comment if you see a error, and you can suggest edits. You can't edit the document, but you can comment. So
Sure.
you can drop resources. I'll accept them all, and we'll just add to the list. So there's that. And
As
then
another
the
example
slides.
of collective intelligence and
Well,
hive
that's
mind.
the whole point. Oh, and,
Yeah.
and so final thought, and then I'm going to end the meeting and stop the recording. Robert mentioned Teilhard de Chardin.
Yes.
And it was over 100 years ago that he came up with the idea of the noosphere. And in my illustration of the world, all interconnected with satellites and electronic things and all of that, I called that noosphere. Small letter at the bottom, small type. But I ran into that concept in the 70s. I learned it from Paolo Soleri, the architect, who you may know, Tom. And he was a big fan of Teilhard de Chardin and this idea of the evolution of intelligence across civilizations and around the world. And this was pre-computers. I mean, I had written a program in Fortran, but at that point, basically computers were in the basement and nobody used them. But we were having discussions about the noosphere in the 70s. And
Yeah.
so it's interesting that here, all these many years later, Robert brings it up in today's discussion, Teilhard de
Yeah.
Chardin.
Well, I've written about
very
how computers have turned me into a constructivist and a postmodernist in that sense. But
well, now you need to become a connectivist, and that's Stephen Downes and George Siemens, his partner.
I know Siemens and Downs. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a computer science term, connectivist.
But I mean, it's all the same thing. It's all
Yeah,
the same
exactly.
thing.
They're just words.
Read Foucault. You
Yeah.
can take the politics out of it and then just think about that as how we construct language and societies out of our language, and the rules and so on and so forth, and culture and all these other things out of, these are all constructed things, and we don't like to think of them that way because it takes away our roots,
Yeah.
And so,
Okay, on
constructed
that note,
narratives.
I thank everybody. We've this is the longest Wiser seminar in history, I believe, and I love that. And I think everybody here has access to Zoom, and you all have my email. In fact, it's at the bottom of the, oh no, my screen's only showing to me. But anyway, you have my email, and let's continue the conversation as Robert suggested.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.